Give me a second. All right, working good. Hello, good morning. We're going to go from systems programming to tech, money, and politics. So I think we're aiming for like 100% audience alienation is the goal here. So, who here, and this is going to be a question that I want to start by making you uncomfortable. Who here writes code for money? I do. Yeah, I know we're not supposed to say that. We write it purely for passion, but also for money. Who here writes code for money at a tech company? I do. Not everyone does. Who here uses products programmed at a tech company, say GitHub or NPM? Who pays for products that are programmed at a tech company? Who makes products that they sell to other tech companies? That's a thing I do. Not everyone does that either. Tech company, tech company, tech company, money, 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 money. So tech companies make a lot of money, and they've made a lot of people very rich. Some of those people they've made rich through profits off of sales of products directly, but not very many. That's not the typical model for tech company money making these days. Mostly those profits come from a large exit event, such as like an IPO or a sale. Not such as, those are the two exit events. And the profits from those events, I don't know why they're called that, but that's what people say, the events, are split between the shareholders who own shares of that company. It can be employees, it's often in some part early employees, but it's usually mostly investors, people and firms who have given those product makers money in exchange for a share of the company in the hopes of this large event happening. We call early stage investors venture capitalists because it sounds like, I don't know, an early, like a Victorian cowboy novel. I don't know why we call them that, but it has to do with the risk involved and the earliness of the investment. I want to define that because I'm going to be saying the word VC a lot. So when we work at these companies, as many of us do, as I do, and many folks who raise their hands do, our labor is going to grow the investment that these people have made. Some of it may be going to grow our own investment, but it's shared between those things. And when it does pay off, the money that's made out of our labor goes to these people, and they use it for other things. Some of that is other tech companies. Increasingly more and more, it's been spent on political campaigns and races. So there is a lot of national investment from tech companies into politics. Barack Obama certainly has gotten a lot of money, fundraising money from tech folks. Lobbying, there's been almost like a hockey stick style growth in lobbyists paid directly by tech companies. National candidates too, $4 million was spent this year on a House race in San Jose trying to elect Ro Khanna to the House of Representatives as sort of a tech company friendly legislator. National priorities, tech money-wise, are usually sort of immigration, tax policy, cybersecurity, and net neutrality. I am not going to talk about immigration because some things are sacred, and that's absolutely a third rail in our community. So I'm not touching it. Tax policy generally is the same as everyone else. Tech companies don't want to pay it either. Cybersecurity and net neutrality are things that other people have talked about and talked about better. So I'm not going to talk about national priorities in tech political spending. I'm actually going to talk more about spending on local, state, and regional levels. I believe that this kind of political involvement has more of an impact on our day-to-day life. I believe we're seeing more and more of it, and it's changing rapidly right now, so I want to talk about it. So those are the things that tech money cares about on the national level. What does tech money care about on a state and regional level? So, who knows what 6 Californias is? Who has seen like a bad late night joke about 6 Californias? 6 Californias is this plan to split California into 6 states, you know, small government and all that. It's completely unworkable. It's insane. It doesn't make any sense. It was a ballot initiative. They missed the deadline in 2014 and gathered signatures for they're now gathering signatures for 2016. They collected 1 million signatures to try to get it on the ballot in 2014. That ended up being about 750,000 valid signatures, so about 3/4, which actually isn't bad, which says a lot about California and initiative politics. They missed by about 50K. So they're looking to put it back on the ballot in 2016. This is Tim Draper. He is a billionaire venture capitalist. He is the son of another billionaire venture capitalist, and he's the grandson of yet another billionaire venture capitalist. He's the founder of Draper, Fisher, Jerger, and Draper Associates. I also believe his son is a VC. Some of his investments are Skype, Hotmail, Tesla, Baidu, which is like the Chinese search engine, Twitch, and an unaccredited university named after him in San Mateo offering degrees in entrepreneurship. He is the sole funder of 6 Californias. He poured $5 million to buy those 800,000 signatures to get it on the ballot, and he's going to pour more in to get it on the ballot in 2016. So, you know, wacky rich guy, right? That's in, by the way, this picture was taken in his university. This is the seating at Draper University in San Mateo. So, you know, woohoo, crazy tech story, right? Here's the thing. It's not actually his first political venture. In 2000, there was another time very recently where people were making obscene amounts of money and then investing it in local politics. I know we've forgotten that ever happened and refused to talk about what happened at the end of it. But in 2000, in the first tech boom, he sponsored a state proposition called Proposition 38. Prop 38 proposed to give every student in the state $4,000 to attend private school. No regulations or constraints whatsoever, no means testing, nothing. It was essentially a proposal to privatize public education at the cost of about $3.5 billion to the state of California. Tim spent $23 million of his own money on this proposition. His dad threw in another $2.5 million. It was believed to be the largest contribution by an individual to a ballot proposition in California history at that time. It's a large amount of money. This was, to be fair, pretty beanbag wacky. That's very far to the right of even like the most ardent voucher proposals. And it failed. It did not succeed. Not before the opponents of it spent another $30 million opposing it. So this is still in the realm of crazy guy doing crazy things in politics, but he actually was fresh off a stint on the State Board of Education. Tim Draper was appointed by Governor Pete Wilson in 1998 to the State Board of Education. His only qualification was having developed a business simulation game for kids and fundraising for Pete Wilson, of course. The Board of Education sets education policy in California. It orders textbooks. It sort of adopts policy and writes the actual practical implementation of policies. That's quite a bit of power for someone who went on to then propose privatizing the entire education system. Gray Davis, a Democrat, replaced Pete Wilson as governor in 1999. Tim Draper was not reappointed. In his place, however, Reed Hastings was. And you probably know Reed Hastings as the CEO of Netflix. He's also on the board of Facebook. He was on the board of Microsoft. He was already rich when he founded Netflix from a $750 million acquisition of a previous company he helmed. He was and is a major Democratic donor nationally and locally, and he was a special supporter of the newly elected Governor Davis. And he stayed on the Board of Education much longer than Tim Draper, through the beginning of Governor Schwarzenegger's term, and he actually was the president of the Board of Education for 4 years. And Reed had a big money school bill on the ballot in 2000 as well. Prop 39 reduced the threshold for local school board initiatives to pass from 66% to 55%. So it said to pass a school bond, local school bond measure, you only need 55% of the vote. Previously, it had been 66%. And this had a big effect on bills getting passed, actually, to fund school districts locally. It passed easily. Partially probably because they outspent their opponents 6-1. They raised $31.5 million to pass Proposition 39 in 2000. Reed gave $1 million of his money personally. The main funder was, and the passing of this bill was in big part thanks to Reed's buddy and the campaign co-chair, John Doerr. John Doerr is the star partner at Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield & Byers. That is a very powerful venture capital investment firm in the South Bay. They made their substantial wealth by investing in Google, Amazon, AOL, Intuit, Sun, EA, Genentech, Zynga. Lots of things have been funded by Kleiner Perkins. John Doerr, the partner, gave $6 million himself. Kleiner Perkins gave $1 million from the firm. There was a couple other partners that gave a total of $1.5 million. More than $8 million basically made from investments in these companies went to pass Prop 39. So, you got to be thinking, all that just to lower the voting threshold for these school bond bills? That seems like a lot of money to spend. Turns out there was a provision of Prop 39 that didn't have anything to do with bond funding. Charter schools are private organizations, some nonprofit and some for-profit, that run public schools. They're funded by taxpayer dollars. They're funded per student the way that public schools are. This has been a growing movement over the past about 20 years as a way of reforming the education system, basically taking the government out of it. Well, not their money. There's a proposition, a point in the bill, Prop 39, that requires that public school districts provide charter schools with space reasonably equivalent to those used by non-charter schools in the district. So they have to lease, if they have space, they have to give it to charter schools if they ask for it, basically. And it has to be identically furnished and located in the area the charter school wants to locate in. And so different school districts have done this in different ways. LA Unified School District has fulfilled this request through co-location, which means putting charter schools in the same actual building and facilities as non-charter schools, which is a very literal reading of what the bill is asking for. It's incredibly controversial. It doesn't go well very often, and charter schools are not happy with it generally. So this culminated recently in a series of drawn-out lawsuits against the LA Unified School District by the California Charter Schools Association. You're probably wondering where I'm going with this. Guess who's on the board of the California Charter Schools Association? Reed Hastings is recently appointed to the board there. Reed Hastings is also a co-founder of and a major investor in Aspire Public Schools, which is California's largest charter provider. He is on the board of the KIPP Charter School Network, which is a massive nationwide network of charter schools. He's on that board along with the CEO of Viacom. He's also, another member of that board is the managing director of Bain Capital. You may remember Bain Capital from the Mitt Romney presidential campaign, but besides ridiculous Christmas parties with Mitt Romney and bad photo ops, they've also funded things like Optimizely, Rent the Runway, and LinkedIn. Pretty big tech investment arm of Bain Capital. He's also on the board of and a major investor in the rocket ship K-5 charter network, which is known for its incredibly aggressive growth plans. They have their own real estate development agency to buy land and build facilities for themselves. This is a really tech-friendly organization. The former CEO, John Danner, is a man made wealthy by a tech buyout in the first boom. The investors include the CFO of Skype, Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook, Dave Goldberg, who's the CEO of SurveyMonkey, Arthur Rock, who is a legendary venture capitalist who invested in Fairchild Semi, he invested in Apple, he invested in Intel. They're partners from Menlo Ventures, which funded Uber and Warby Parker, Excel Partners, who led rounds for Etsy and Dropbox, Benchmark Capital, who's founded Snapchat, Instagram, Yelp, and then the aforementioned Kleiner Perkins and John Doerr. All of these people are major investors in, we're talking 1 million plus in rocket ship. That's a lot of tech people. That's a lot of tech investors. There's actually a lot of money coming from tech to fund what is often cast as a grassroots charter movement, right? And actually, once you start noticing this is everywhere you look. Laureen Powell-Jobs is now, after her husband's death, has been sort of lauded for her newfound philanthropic interest, and she's been giving massive grants to charters via her Emerson Collective Education Fund. The CEO of Code.org recently gave a huge chunk of cash to support a measure to establish charter schools in Washington State. Mark Zuckerberg's $100 million donation to Newark schools, which has been kind of a clusterfuck, was actually focused directly on charters. It was a main tenet of that $100 million donation. So there's a lot of money there from tech in this movement and in these organizations. What is it being spent on? So at a certain point within the last couple of years, the folks funding these movements have turned their focus from state propositions, although those still exist and there's still political work being done on the state level in favor of charters, to local governments. And there has been an absolutely unprecedented flow of money from political action campaigns into school board elections, which are, generally, even in big cities, kind of tiny affairs. In Oakland, in 2012, $185,000 was spent by tech funded PACs on school board elections here, $150K this year. In West West Contra Costa County school board election this year, $350,000 spent by one PAC in a school board race. $250,000 in Santa Clara against candidate Anna Song, who's never even had outward opposition to charters. It's across the country. It's happening all over. The focus has turned to school board races. So why is that? So these are a couple of quotes from Reed Hastings recently. The first one, he's basically saying, what's the problem with school districts? Definitely they're democratically elected school boards. Apparently they're getting a little sick of having to spend all this money to keep candidates in there. He outwardly said that one goal of the charter school movement is to get to shrink school board power. And this is where any opposition that happens to school boards generally happens at the school board to charter schools, generally happens at the school board level. This last quote is really instructive, right? It's like, why, right? This is a huge amount of money and a really like widespread movement. Why do it? And this quote here says basically how Reed Hastings envisions the role of a school district in this new model of education is to bring charter schools to town like a chamber of commerce would develop business. And I think that's a really instructive quote. Why is all this money going to charter schools? So, Rocketship that I mentioned is a huge proponent of the concept of blended learning, which is classroom time that's really focused on, it's backed up by computer-based instruction. A lot of these charter schools are very tech-focused. There's a ton of online work that happens. It's bringing tech into the schools. There's in fact some schools that are entirely online, doing online education. What that means is that there's a lot of software to be made, and there's a lot of software to be sold to fulfill these needs for online classes and for online education and online tools. And in fact, there's an entire newish sector called EdTech, which is growing hugely. It focuses on a couple different things, but K-12 EdTech in particular has been a market that's gone up hugely in the last decade, last even 2, 3, 4 years. It's become a huge focus of folks. It's stuff like online classes, apps to drill for tests, things like that. And it's broad, and there's a ton of money going into it. Some of it directly by some of the folks that I mentioned earlier who are investing in these charter schools. Dreambox is a online math education program that Reed Hastings and John Doerr recently bought for 8 figures, and it's used by all the Rocketship schools. It's like an official tool that they use. John Danner, who was the CEO of Rocketship, actually left to develop an app that's now used by Rocketship schools. There are VC firms that only focus on EdTech. There are accelerators now. There are multiple EdTech accelerators, some of which are focused directly on K-12 education. There are some challenges in investing in EdTech, as our favorite Twitter thought leader has pointed out here, Mark Andreessen, who's also a major venture capitalist, famous for his investment in Netscape. I think this is a really interesting quote because Mark Andreessen does invest in EdTech despite this quote. He's not saying he wouldn't invest in EdTech, he's saying these conditions make it difficult. And so one approach to that is doing some of the things that I talked about earlier, which is changing the way that public schools, as they're conceived, sort of exist so that you can change how they procure things. And in fact, Andreessen Horowitz recently hired as a political consultant Adrian Fenty, the ex-mayor of DC, who's a very famous charter school advocate. And that explicitly as a political consultant to help them with political interventions for their portfolio companies. Another way to do that is to create markets outside of public schools, which is could be you could sort of sell the charter schools off of that, but even things like just last month, Andreessen Horowitz invested in a new private school chain, completely private. Venture-funded schools is kind of an unusual model and a new thing. There's a thing called for-profit universities have also seen investment from tech companies. There's also not sort of bypassing the schools themselves and selling directly to students and parents. There's been a big wave of free products recently that are designed to enhance learning. And as we know, when you have a free product from a for-profit company, what's being sold there is not the app itself, but it's the data. And in some ways, having some sway over regulations about the use of student data could be a really, really lucrative thing for investors. So what? Okay, so let me say this. Let me just cut off a conversation I'm not interested in having after this talk. You don't need to come up to me and tell me about how your little niece is in the best charter school and it's amazing, or Teach for America saved your cousin's life, or whatever. I don't care. And also, I don't think it's actually relevant to the point I'm trying to make, right? The charter school's sort of argument or discussion is complex, right? I'm by no means trying to suggest that all of the thousands, if not millions, of students in charter schools and teachers and administrators who are working very hard to give students good education are evil or are scheming for profit, right? But this is going on, and we're basically having a private infrastructure built under our nose by people who are openly advocating for less democratic processes in order to serve their own economic interests. And that bothers me. I find it disturbing. I think that's reasonable to be mad about that, right? Public schooling has been considered a cornerstone of our democracy forever, right? And you might agree or disagree with this particular approach to education reform, but our ability to have that conversation at all is being usurped, right? And what's more is to us, it's being usurped with our own money, with our own labor, right? With money that we're generating. So I think that's worth paying attention to, and it's worth caring about. Another thing to note is that there's something that we know about tech companies and investors. They copy, right? For every Uber, you get a Lyft. Sometimes the models that are copied go on to be far more successful than the original. You do get things like Facebook out of MySpace. I want to wrap up by talking about a way that I think that this pattern, which has been pretty successful so far, is starting to be applied again. Who knows who this is? Yes? Say his name. If you say it 3 times in the mirror, he appears covered in blood. This is Ron Conway. We were not going to get through a presentation in the Bay Area about tech money and politics without Ron Conway. Ron Conway is a very prolific tech investor. He's invested in Airbnb and Google very early on too, so he's made a ton of money. Airbnb, Google, PayPal, Twitter, Zynga, Facebook, BuzzFeed, Reddit, Pinterest, Mint, Square, over 650 companies. I guarantee this morning you have interacted with a Ron Conway investment product. There's no way you didn't. For a while, every Y Combinator company he was buying shares in. I mean, he gets around and he's made an absolute, almost inconceivable amount of money in early stage tech investing. This is maybe his most impressive purchase to date. The entire political apparatus of San Francisco. And I'm by no means exaggerating, and this is all very public. It's not hidden. There's articles about it. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I encourage you, if this is new or a little bit unfamiliar to you, to look into it, because it's pretty fascinating. Basically, he, in 2011, I believe, stepped in to negotiate a tax break to allow, the way it's phrased is to keep Twitter in the city, which I have a lot of, anyway, we could talk about it at lunch. He negotiated a massive tax break for Twitter and other companies in the mid-market area. He basically decided, that was great, I liked that, let's do more of it. He spent $600,000 getting the mayor of San Francisco elected, likely re-elected. Just 2 weeks ago, the main opposing candidate in 2015 basically said, I'm too scared of Ron Conway to run against Ed Lee. He also bought 5 or 6, 7 possibly, depending on how you're counting, supervisors on the board of supervisors, including the president of the board of supervisors. And this is in order to enact laws that are favorable for companies he's invested in. And he, in fact, was so blatant about buying the recent short-term rental law in favor of Airbnb that Airbnb's competitors are suing him for shutting them out. It's pretty impressive. This is Greg Suhr. Greg Suhr is the chief of police in San Francisco. He's often described as an old friend of Ron Conway. I've never found a picture of them together, but still looking. A couple years ago, there was a widely publicized $100,000 donation to SFPD from SF City, which is Ron Conway's coalition of tech companies. Donation is kind of an interesting way to put it. That money actually went to a member of that coalition in order to develop an app for SFPD, and it was the access that Ron Conway has that was made it possible for that public-private partnership to happen. It was an app to access the city's crime data warehouse in the field. So he basically engineered this way for a company under his umbrella to be paid to build something for the SFPD. Just at the beginning of this year, he announced a series of gun safety challenges for entrepreneurs. This is in response to Sandy Hook. He came out saying, you know, this is the next new thing. This is where I'm focusing my philanthropic efforts. Philanthropic is an interesting way to put it. Not that gun safety isn't an incredibly worthy cause, but he also has said he is looking for the next Mark Zuckerberg or Larry Page of gun safety. It's an entrepreneurship challenge, which he is offering to invest in technological solutions for gun violence. This is a huge market, admittedly, and this is both for the private owner market, which in this country is very large, but also for the public. And the last challenge in the set of 4 focuses on the euphemistic community safety, which generally is understood to mean policing. A quote from a partner of Conway's in this sort of challenge that they've enacted. There is money to be made. Gun violence is expensive to society, and there's a big potential market for solutions. Ian Sobieski, who's a partner in, I don't even want to say this out loud, in a VC firm called Band of Angels. Kidding me. Yeah, said that at the sort of launch for this set of challenges. And that's really interesting because Sobieski is an investor in SST Inc., and if you've ever done any reading into sort of military or government contractors, you know that the like Vegas names are the most terrifying things. SST Inc. used to be known as ShotSpotter. Oh, yes. If you are an Oakland resident, that may be familiar. $265,000 of Oakland money was spent on implementing this ShotSpotter network of supposedly audio gunshot detectors. The police recently came out and said, yo, this doesn't help us at all. I don't know, like, we generally know when someone gets shot. Turns out ShotSpotter was on all the time, not just when it wasn't activated by anything. It was just on all the time, and recorded voice conversation may have been a feature, not a bug. Oakland has also been investing over the past few years $11 million in the Domain Awareness Center, which is designed to be a surveillance hub for law enforcement, collecting things like ShotSpotter data, traffic cameras, police reports, stuff like that, social media posts into one hub, running it through things like face detection software and data mining software and, you know, alerting software. What I'm getting at is that $11 million was going to software companies, right? Again, this is a market. And that 11 million, it's been scaled down somewhat, and there's been a lot of opposition, understandably, because it came out in public records requests that the overt intention of it was to spy on activists, basically. The money so far has gone to military contractors, but Google actually put in a bid to use some of their services in building this domain awareness center. Google has products, surveillance products, they call it something else. There's some euphemism for this, like intel or like community. It's always community. That's how you know they're talking about police. Community intel, something like that, because they have products that they do sell to other municipalities. They didn't win this bid this time yet, but this is a market that exists. It's growing. The legal sort of barriers in place to prevent it, I would argue, are possibly more easily surmountable than the ones that we've seen have basically been steamrollered by the charter school movement. So this is kind of scary, and I think if I was a betting woman, I would start a terrible firm with a terrible pun name. I suspect that what we'll begin to see is the very valid and understandable calls for police reform start to be engineered and funded by some of the folks who funded the school reform movement. And when I say some of the folks who fund the school reform movement, I mean the people that we make money for. So, I'm not saying this to scold. I work at a company funded by Ron Conway. I've worked at, I think, 3 companies funded by Ron Conway. No company I've worked at, we've covered in all the names that I've said, probably 90% of my salary has come out of some of the names I've said here. This is a fact of life. We pay rent. We do what we do. An argument you could make is that this is the same as other industries. Certainly other industries lobby. Certainly other industries have political involvement. My concern is that while that may be true, we have very little skepticism about some of these initiatives, particularly around ed tech, which I find troubling. We're smart people. We can get our heads around this. I believe in us. And part of that is just paying attention. I did a lot of research for this presentation, but I wasn't exactly like filing Freedom of Information Act requests and combing through obscure things. I was reading articles published by journalists. The stuff's out there, and we should be listening because this is our blood in the game, our skin in the game. Finally, I was going to open this. I considered opening this talk with a moment of silence inspired by Dara Hopwood did this recently at a conference I was at in St. Louis. I thought it was very moving. And I sat down to like make a slide for it, and I was just like, a moment of silence for who? Like, for, you know, like Eric Garner, who recently the protests have been focused around, for Alex Nieto, who was shot by the SFPD, for Alan Bluford, for a local person, and then the CIA torture thing came out. And when I came right down to it, I think we have enough silence in the tech industry. I think we've contributed more than our fair share of silence. So there's a lot of chilling sort of effects of some of this stuff. I think people feel like maybe their jobs are in danger or something, but I think that some of that is just cowardice. And I think that getting our voices as people who, A, are making money that's being used to implement things like this, and B, who just have a lot of privilege by the fact that we're very well paid, we should be the ones saying things, and we should be paying better attention. So that's all. Thank you.